Hello, welcome to That Inner Voice podcast, the unfiltered podcast for neurodiverse humans navigating life, business, and relationships. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about some of the negativity that we face when we first get diagnosis, when we start talking about it, and then to bring in some positives of how we can handle that. So I'm joined with Jo McMeechan. Is that how you say your name?
To be honest, I answer to most things, McChicken included. Like it just gets mashed up into lots of. Officially, it's McMeechan, but I'm honestly, anything and everything.
I'm partly dyslexic, so I read things. They come out as something else. So here we go. There's one part of neurodiversity that we can embrace is
definitely
dyslexia. So welcome to the podcast, Jo, and I'm excited to talk to you today. So firstly, who are you and what do you do?
So I'm an inclusion consultant and trainer, but have had, and I'm a SEN parent as well. I'm neurodivergent and queer business owner. Wearer of many hats is probably, it's pretty classic ADHD trait, isn't it? I suppose.
Yep.
So I'm the founder and director of a company called the SENStory Group, and we support children and young people with additional needs, from neurodivergence and disabilities all the way through with equine therapy, learning and nature-based therapies out in our headquarters in South Gloucestershire. But we also very much recognise that through the journey, our children and young people are going to be stepping out into the world as adults at some point. And so we follow that path and that journey through to business as well, supporting business owners and individuals to kind of understand their own profiles of need, particularly around neurodivergence, and expanding what we do around inclusion within business too. So we can kind of follow that through. And we do that in lots of different ways through training and consultancy, but ultimately I come at it from a place of lived experience. I've got about 15 years of professional work in the disability sector as a children's physio, specialising in neurology, neurodivergence and everything. So aware of many hats, come at it from lots of different angles, really. And I suppose you could probably say it's my topic of interest.
Yep. So you turned your interest topic into a lucrative business, right?
Yeah.
Same here. So I'm Jen and I'm neurodivergent, queer, and wearer of many hats also.
Yeah.
And I love that you use equine therapy. So I'm ADHD, autistic and dyslexic.
Yeah.
And growing up, horses were my specialist subject. So by the age of 10, I knew the whole anatomy and physiology of a horse and how they move and all their paces, all different types of hay and straw and how to identify them. And more so, they were my refuge, my sanctuary. And I would be so happy by myself with my horses.
Yeah.
At the stables when all the other children were not there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a strength, isn't there, in their energy, and that's exactly what we do at SENStory. You know, we work with our herd. We don't work in a ridden capacity. We just work with them on the ground, in kind of working on emotional literacy and social communication and self-awareness, self-confidence, self-advocacy, which is kind of the ultimate, particularly around neurodivergence. I think, you know, being able to understand ourselves and actually advocate for ourselves is so important. And I guess probably kind of draws in on that theme of how much negativity and misconceptions and preconceptions that people have around neurodivergence. So we work really hard, and the horses are such incredible team members around being able to support that for the children and young people that we work with.
They just know, don't they?
Oh, they do.
They're incredibly healing. So I want to start by, if anyone's new to the podcast and is new to the word neurodiverse and neurodivergent, it's kind of hard to avoid at the moment. So it's everywhere because there's so much awareness around it now. But in your words, Jo, in your professional, from a professional stance, what is neurodivergent or neurodiversity? Because we're here for a lot.
Yeah, and there's a difference between the two. And I think the two terms are often kind of banded around interchangeably. Neurodiversity is exactly like, if we break it down into the two parts of the word, neuro, anything neurological, brain related, diversity being that kind of range of diverse nature that's within all of us. So neurodiversity represents the ways in which our brains take in, process and respond to information, and that's different for each of us. Every single one of us has this kind of unique profile around neurodiversity that's as unique to us as a fingerprint is. No one person is the same as another. Wouldn't life be boring if we were? So that's neurodiversity. And then when we talk about neurodivergence, we're talking about like an umbrella term that covers a range of neurodiversity that doesn't sit within the majority of the population. It sits within a smaller portion of the population. And we can umbrella being autistic or ADHD, being dyslexic, dyscalculic, dysgraphic, all of those sorts of things sit under the umbrella of neurodivergence. So neurodivergence is a term that describes anybody that isn't neurotypical, anybody that doesn't kind of sit in the mainstay of population in the way that we think, process, take in or respond to information, basically.
So is bipolar disorder sitting there? Because I've heard conflicting in my studies. So I'm doing a couple of courses at the moment in understanding ADHD and understanding autism, so I can then therefore support my community, not just from lived experience but from a professional experience as well. So I've heard a few things about bipolar disorder being classed in that, but it's not in any of my official teachings.
Yeah, so I think where there's still some confusion, debate, whether we want to call it either of those things, really. Bipolar, if you look at it on a clinical basis, it wouldn't necessarily sit under neurodivergence. But what I do know happens around bipolar and kind of personality disorders and things as well, from a mental health umbrella, there's so much interconnection between the two. And there's also, for a lot of there can be either misdiagnosis or there can be kind of dual diagnosis that sits alongside. So I know that the occurrence of neurodivergence and bipolar, for example, it can be more common for the two things to kind of sit hand in hand. But I think clinically, if you look at it, you're going to look at it under a mental health umbrella and not under a neurodivergence umbrella.
So let's bust a few myths then, because being neurodivergent isn't a mental health illness, disorder, whatever you want to call it. I really dislike both of those names.
I do too.
And I really like the 2 Ds in ADHD. I don't dislike them. I mean, it's not a complete deficit of attention, and it's not a disorder for me. I feel those parts of it are really disempowering. And that's something that when I got my diagnosis, I was diagnosed with OCD years and years ago, and bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder. Actually, it turns out I'm autistic, and it took me until I was 40 for anybody to recognize that. And I think it was because of trauma, because I was extremely good at masking. I mean, I could win Oscars for my acting and my social chameleon personality will adapt to any situation. And then when I got my diagnosis, like, everything made sense. And I don't even call it a diagnosis now. I call it a discovery. So I've started saying that and using that within my community, just because for me that feels more empowering language, and it also then lets me break free from this belief or that I adopted, or this belief that was trying to be put upon me that there was something broken or wrong with me.
Yeah.
So what's your like viewpoint on that when people are getting diagnosed and misdiagnosed? Because there's so much of it that I've seen, especially in women.
Yeah, I think it's huge, and I think that it's such a topic at the minute as well. It's something that I've been posting about recently, around like use of neuroaffirming language and coming away from things like developmental disorders and or developmental delay and disorders and all of this sort of language that it perpetuates this narrative that there is something that is less than. It's an ableist perspective. I think we have to recognize that there are areas of clinical diagnosis, there are areas of like information, official information. I mean, if we look at the Equality Act, for example, it's not been updated for the last like 14 years. And even the language within that is really disempowering. It's not affirming. And I think what language like that does is it just completely accentuates this narrative that sits around neurodivergence as it being something that is less than, something that we need to wrap up, bubble up. It's this real ableist view, and we've got to start deconstructing that, because if we're going to think about diversity in other areas of inclusion with a more powerful and empowering lens, we need to start bringing that language into what we're doing around neurodivergence as well. And we need to start dropping the terms disorders and deficits and, and really starting to look at this on a different level. And I think the word discovery is just so affirming, isn't it? And for so many people who are late diagnosed or have this like light bulb moment, for me, my discovery happened as a result of the journey that I went through with my kids and with their barriers for access to education and inclusion. And my youngest had a huge mental health crisis when he was 6 in his second year in primary school, and his transition to primary school was just massively traumatic and difficult for him. He's autistic, ADHD, PDA profile, masked hugely. And my own discovery journey sat within his, and then within my eldest, who's ADHD and has another collection of umbrellas with under the banner of like neurodivergence as well. And it is enlightening. But the thing for me that was so empowering before that discovery was a process. I had some really incredibly affirming coaching and support that happened for me prior to that discovery journey. And I had almost discovered within that how to empower and advocate for myself, because I understood my profile and I understood myself and I understood my needs. And I just started to deconstruct this belief system that actually I wasn't disorganized, I wasn't chaotic, I wasn't forgetful, I wasn't shit at what I was doing, I wasn't less than, I'm just ADHD. And that when I have the right systems and the right support networks in place, and when I can advocate for myself because I understand what support I need, that's so powerful. But that puzzle piece for so many people, even once they've had a discovery, that puzzle piece of actually being able to understand their own profile and understand who they are and what support works for them is still missing. And we're disempowered by that process as well, I think.
Yeah. So I've signed myself away from the psychiatric system altogether. I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Yeah. And I've got 22 years experience as a holistic practitioner, trauma therapist, and energy practitioner. So I haven't got 22 years as a trauma specialist. I'd started my journey, and then that came a bit later on in my journey. But so I felt I had a good understanding of myself, and I'd done like 9 years of shedding my own belief systems, but without the knowledge of that I was neurodiverse. And then that was my missing puzzle piece to go, aha. Like 2 years ago, I was like, what? And
it's validating, isn't it?
it was completely life affirming. Yeah. But then I needed to then go and deal with the anger, the frustration, the resentment towards the system, towards my parents, towards the school. Like, you know, I first ran away from school in year 4. And because of a change of teacher, you know, unannounced. Like, I was like, you know, so blatantly autistic. And then it makes me mad because all of my mum was trying to push for support, but it wasn't around then in the 80s and the early 90s while I was in school. Just wasn't talked about. It wasn't recognised as much as it is today. And I had a lot of grieving to do as well. So a lot of grieving the parts of myself that I created in order to survive. So all of those masks and versions of me, I kind of said goodbye to and began the unmasking process. And it's, for me, it's an ongoing journey. But one thing I do want to bring up, it is some of those negatives that we face and how to maybe deal with those. So more negatives I've felt from other people that just don't understand it, but in my personal journey, and then what I've observed online, and then I've observed helping one of my children go through this with the schooling system, which I've now taken her out of school completely. So I've got
mine are out
to all the structural systems, and we're actually converting a van, and we're going to go and live in a van life, and travel around doing amazing wellness workshops. So there you go. But so I want to just talk about some of those things then that maybe someone's listening that they're considering going forth into a diagnosis. How, you know, there's with the waiting lists right now, I've noticed this, that people are like, well, how am I going to get this support through the NHS? In my area, it's 5 years now.
Yeah. Which is pretty common, I think, isn't it? I think a lot of people, particularly as so many people are beginning to have these light bulb moments of discovery around diagnostic processes, those waiting lists and those demand for assessment is getting higher and higher and higher. But what we also see within that is the assessment process gives a diagnosis, but the understanding, the support, the empowering part of that and understanding yourself is still missing. And I think that for me is where there is more work to be done around those conversations becoming more positive, because if we haven't got an underlying understanding of need first and foremost, we can't generate human to human connection. And I in my training, when I go in and deliver training around neurodivergence, for example, one of the key things that I do, talk about these things called light bulb moments, and I will talk about like the sensory system, for example, because neurologically we all have different thresholds around our sensory systems for response. Our sensory systems are designed to keep us safe. They're really primitive. You know, they were designed for us to know if something was burning, if a saber-toothed tiger was going to come and eat us, etc., etc. We'd smell it, we'd hear it, we'd see it, etc. And we still have those innate primitive responses, those trauma responses of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? But that's not unique to somebody who's neurodivergent. What's unique to someone who's neurodivergent is the thresholds at which they process or respond to that sensory information. But everybody has a sensory system. Everybody processes sensory information. Everybody will have something that gives them the ick or makes them go, ugh, I hate that around the sensory system. So when there are negative conversations that are being had or negative perceptions around the way that we're responding to things, or that like some of those automatic trauma responses, I like to generate conversation to find what that ick is for those people. Because when you take them to that place, like for me, And you'll notice, and I always say this in advance because I can't start talking about it because then my language centers drop and my speech goes, and I can't talk about it because I'm in that place of my sensory system is panicking.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is a wooden fork. And I have to dig deep. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I can't either.
No. And when you think about it, everybody's nervous systems begin to shut down. Absolutely.
Or
yeah.
taking straws.
And
Yeah.
everybody's got one of those things. And when you find what that thing is, I call it a sensory nemesis because we have too much.
That's a great description, Jo. Yeah.
And it's like kryptonite. You know, we talk about, we have this bullshit line that talks about how neurodivergence is a superpower. It's absolutely not, but we do have kryptonite.
Don't even.
So when you find your nemesis and you find your kryptonite, because everybody's got one, everyone's got a sensory system, everyone's got a sensory nemesis of some sort. When you find that and you begin to tap into how it makes you feel internally, actually you start to understand that real safety and that real like trauma response, fight, flight, freeze or fawn, which we can relate to neurodivergence. There's suddenly relatability there. So we get to start to deconstruct some of those negative conversations or some of that, well, that's just a massive overreaction, or, oh, for goodness sake, like, why is that even a thing? Or everybody's autistic or ADHD or whatever else we want to be spouting that's not true at the moment.
Yeah.
We start to generate connection and understanding human to human. And I think that's so powerful around deconstructing the negativity from those conversations.
So that's something that we hear a lot of. Oh, isn't everybody on the spectrum? Everyone's a little bit ADHD. And things like, you know, why are you being so sensitive? Oh, just don't worry about it. Like these, like for me, I'm very, very sensitive to everything. And especially if I'm stressed, all of that then heightens. So whistling is one of mine. And it makes me feel very violent inside.
Yeah.
Like, no, and it makes me feel really shamed. Because a man was standing behind me in a queue whistling, and I felt my fist clench. And I had to put my fingers in my ears and just go la 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 la. And I don't care what I looked like, because I'd rather look stupid to other people don't understand it than have a full-on meltdown in the middle of Tesco.
Yeah.
Because someone's whistling behind me. That's how it gets me.
Yeah.
I can't, there's nothing I can do about
it. No, because it is an innate neurological response. It's designed to keep you safe. So, you know, and I think there's a real validation in knowing and understanding like responses, particularly from a sensory perspective, that those responses are neurological. They are designed to keep you safe, and it's okay for you to want to react in one of those four ways. It's actually, there's nothing you can do in terms of controlling it other than responding in a way that's going to make you feel safer and change your environment or change your circumstances.
So I think the first step then is bringing your awareness to what those things are. So like I've just described like whistling, but then it's also anybody touching my face, because I think then the germs on their hands are going to make my face fill with spots. So that's then, and I can't go into swimming pools. I can't touch the floor with my feet.
Yeah.
And then when I was little, my mum was telling me that I had this thing about bits in the bath. I had to inspect the bath. If there's any fleck or any sort of bit whatsoever, I wouldn't get in it. Or then if I was in it and there was a bit, I would literally leap out of the bath. Like I've learned to deal with some of those things, so I understand what they are. But I think the first thing is like bringing your awareness into those things. Notice what makes you feel on edge, or when your sensory processing is just totally off the scale. Like for me, clothes. And when I started unmasking, I've chucked out so many of my clothes because I wore them to fit in. I would Google, what do you wear to a networking meeting?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I have entire Pinterest boards dedicated to stuff like that, Jen.
So, anyone who's watching who's done that, that maybe you're neurodiverse. And what do you wear? Because if it was me, I'd walk around in Care Bear pajamas like all day, every day, or something like that.
Sounds great. Yeah.
That sort of that childlike, and I didn't realise so many things that I do are autistic traits, and that's been like these, like you said, these light bulb moments, like ping, 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 and suddenly things make sense.
Yeah.
So what? So someone then, let's talk. So we talked about the negativities of sensory issues. What things then could people put in place for them to empower themselves so that they can then go out into these environments if they need to, so they're not restricting their lives?
Absolutely. And I think, so I talk about where we've got like sensory kryptonite or sensory nemesis, we have also got these things that kind of enhance what I call processing powers. So it's not superpower bullshit. It's just literally about enhancing what we know makes us feel good. So in my head, this is a seesaw. When we're regulated, our seesaw sits in balance. We've been able to balance out the kind of the nemesis stuff with the stuff that helps us and supports our sensory system. Because in the same way that we can have this sensory kryptonite that makes us feel have these safety responses, we also can use our sensory systems for calm, and we can use it for well-being as well. So whilst it's really important that we understand the things that are those kryptonite factors, we also need to understand the things that are going to balance out the seesaw in another direction. And a lot of the time what we need is more of that stuff in response to the stuff that's tricky as well, because our nervous systems need time to come down. Our cortisol, stress levels, etc., need time to come down. It takes ages. That's why we've experienced burnout. That's why we experience fatigue as well. So it's just as powerful to know what actually helps you to feel calm. For some people, getting under a weighted blanket is absolutely brilliant for regulating a nervous system. For other people, that tactile experience, that proprioceptive experience is absolutely horrific.
Yeah, I feel trapped.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it really gets my goat. It really gets my goat when I see people talking about, oh, if you've got ADHD or if you're autistic, then you need to try this. No. Understand yourself, understand what helps you to feel calm. And if helping you to feel calm means that you are hanging upside down off the sofa so that you're nurturing your vestibular system, or you are actually just allowing yourself to get up and dance in the kitchen and move or get some fresh air, or you're regulating your nervous system through breath work, for example, which we know drops your cortisol levels, your stress responses, and raises up all those calm hormones that help our emotional regulation. Whatever you need to do to balance out your seesaw is totally okay, but you have to explore the things that make you feel good and make you go, oh God, I feel so much better now, to actually understand how you can respond to those things.
Yeah.
So if you want to break down some of those barriers, exploring that first and foremost means that you are giving yourself the tools. You're building a toolkit of calm, of response to sensory dysregulation, for example. And that's super, super powerful.
That is so important, isn't it? To build your toolkit. I love that bit of advice. Build your toolkit, and your toolkit won't look the same as my toolkit.
No.
My toolkit won't look the same as your toolkit, Jo.
No.
But there might be some similarities in there.
Absolutely.
So, we can suggest things. So I'm a breathwork teacher and trainer and everything, and I also do cold therapy. But one thing that I always reiterate whenever I'm doing wellness stuff is this might not be for everybody.
Yeah.
And I really want to break down that everybody needs to do ice baths. No, actually you don't.
No.
Okay. If it's going to be too activating for you, it depends. So the nervous system, it depends where you are in your dysregulation of the nervous system, because some people don't need more high energy stuff. they need to actually come into rest and digest, and that's when they're going to access the healing, because otherwise they're just is another way of bypassing healing, right?
Yes.
So but people don't teach that, they don't understand that, because it's not everybody needs to do that. So,
and I think as an ADHD who is a chronic overactivator, shall we say, like, I will constantly be seeking the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
same.
And the hardest part of the process for me is actually that process of surrender, of slowing down, of rest and digest. And I also know when I do it, how healing and how incredible it is for me and how energizing it is for me. But I'm not naturally driven to achieve that in certain ways. And I am somebody who responds amazingly to cold water therapy, but I respond amazingly with it in conjunction with breath work, and working with breath work and cold water therapy practitioners who can safely guide me through that. But for some people, that's going to be different. And when we're talking about a spectrum of need, when we're talking about that wide umbrella level of diversity and neurodivergence, you have to work out what's right for you to break down those barriers.
And kind of have fun exploring that as well.
Yeah.
I suggest that, like, have fun, try the thing. If it doesn't feel good, don't do it. Try something else. Like, find something that you find a combination of, like, oh yeah, that works, and then that might change and evolve as well as you get to know yourself on your self-discovery journey. That might change. So,
and it might, sorry, Jen. It might also change, I guess, in response to, like, if you're particularly heightened or particularly dysregulated on a day, that thing that you've tried in your toolbox previously might be something you need to chuck out because it's more dysregulating. It depends whether we need stimulation or whether we need calm on any particular given day. So, and that process of exploration is always valuable, because even if you find the things that you hate, you'll know that those are the things that are going to deplete you, and the things that you either need to avoid or have more stuff in your toolkit at the other side of to balance you out.
Yeah, I love that. So I tried the loop earplugs. I've got the experience ones.
Yeah.
So, and when I put them in, I was just walking around the house and I cried. And well, I just explained to people who you've gone, and you understand why, because because I'm always heightened. When I've put those in, it's calmed that. And the nervous system has come into ventral vagal, and then I've just gone, and then I've had a release. So I wasn't upset or anything. It was just literally a release from, because I'm always I bed and I've got a clenched jaw. So you find yourself sitting there, and I'm literally sitting there like relaxing. I'm relaxing on the sofa. And then I'm like,
and relaxing doesn't look the same for any of us either, does it?
I've never been a relaxed person in my life. But that's why, I've done years and years of meditation and breath work, that I am able to recognize, and then I am able to switch myself into switch my nervous system into a rest and digest and relax. After a lot of practice, I must add. So let's talk about so that's some of our sensory difficulties and how to overcome them. What about then negativity from other people? Because I've had a little bit of that in my personal journey, and I've heard a lot of it, like, from other people when they've been describing it, and it's sometimes I'm quite thick-skinned, but I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I've felt, oh, am I making this up? And I'm clearly not, because I've been through the process and I know myself as well. So some of the things that I've personally heard was someone rolling their eyes and going, "You're not autistic." That's one that I've had from somebody in my close family. I'm not going to name names. What else have I had? Yeah, I've heard the one, well, isn't everyone about ADHD? Oh, it's trendy. It's one I really, really dislike with a
Yeah.
passion. So let's break that down a little bit from your point of view, Jo, and
I
how
think
overcome
it always comes down to a lack of understanding, right?
Mm.
It comes down to a lack of, whether we want to look at it from a neuroscience perspective and as a brain geek, like that's where I'm going to go with it all the time, because I feel like there's a validation and a fact, I suppose, in the neuroscientific aspects of it. But I also think that there's just such a process of undoing with stereotyping. And I'm like, I know that before my own exploration journey, like I missed that my youngest was autistic. I absolutely saw the ADHD because that was driving him through, and the environments that he was in were really safe. And then the process of exploration for him around his autistic journey were met by, you know, like that quiet moment where someone will just like not challenge you on it. So sometimes that negativity comes outwardly. Sometimes it comes internally, like there's this internal monologue going on with somebody who's with you where, you know, someone will look down at their shoes or just be like, yeah. And you know, and when you're an energetically sensitive person, if you're picking up on that kind of emotional change or that shift, that for me was how my experience of negativity around diagnostics and that exploration process came in. But the more that I was able to self-affirm my own experiences and my own journey, and the more I was able to raise my self-awareness around my own profile or the kids' profiles of need, for example, the more it became water off a duck's back for me. And I'm not saying it's the same journey for everybody, particularly, I suppose, if somebody has a rejection sensitive profile, that's going to be way more of a challenge to overcome. And I went into, before I got to this place of being like, that's cool, you're not someone who's going to get it yet, and you're not somebody who's open to hearing or understanding to create change. There's kind of two camps of people, aren't there? There's someone whose mind is made up and they're not open to learning and listening, or there's people who are, for want of a better term, like blissfully ignorant. But actually, if you open up a conversation in a safe way and in a way that facilitates learning and connection, people are more likely to actually kind of take those experiences on board and deconstruct their own belief systems. But that's what it is. It's someone else's belief system, that negativity. And the more you can self-affirm in your own journey, the more that other person's belief system becomes less of a, has had less of an impact for me personally over time. And I went through this phase of needing to over-explain, over-define, and I was constantly justifying, and then got to this point where I was like, do you know what, like I just don't need to justify it. This is what we need, and that's it. Like that's a full sentence. I don't have to give any other explanation to it now.
As over-explaining is a huge part of neurodiversity as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to totally info dump everything I need to on you, so to try and get myself seen and heard. And like, but also people pleasing has been a huge part of my journey. And I know that is for so many other neurodivergent humans, that we have just people pleased our way through our lives so much of the time. So there's always that lots of to unpick there, with asking for help
and feeling like you'll get it in a way that is helpful.
Yeah. Not so far to go. This is why the neuro-inclusive spaces are so important.
Yeah,
it's so important. And did you completely kind of change where you hung out and who you hung out with?
God, yeah. Like my friendship groups and circles have changed hugely over the last few years, like over the last 3 to 5 years, since that kind of exploration and discovery journeys happened. My perception of safe people and my unmasking and my tolerance for bullshit, quite frankly, as well, has completely changed. And I have a really firm boundary for myself. And actually, it's only a firm boundary for myself because it's a really firm boundary for my kids. Because to affirm that it's okay for them to authentically be themselves as neurodivergent humans, and having stripped away the environments, the people, the negative voices for them as individuals, I've had to model that as a parent, as a human being myself. So yeah, my social circles have changed massively, and I will only allow safe people into my life who either get it or are willing to hear what I have to say around getting it. But that's a huge journey.
That is a massive journey.
Yeah.
And like, I'm going through something that's quite difficult at the moment with my family, you know, my immediate family, and my child, you know, and well, because I decided to homeschool as well.
Yeah.
And all my family are teachers.
Yeah, we've got one who's home educated and the other's out of the education system with an education other than at school package. So I get it. Like, I get the...
And it's really early days with that. So then it's like, I'm then having, you know, I'm then like empowering my child, because then what they're doing is they're all rallying together. So, and I said, this is really toxic behavior. To my child, I said, what they're doing is they have to reiterate their points. They're reinforcing that negative belief by actually recruiting gang members for their negativity. And I said, it's a form of gaslighting and bullying. So we're not having it.
And that happens. It happens so much, I think, when both within the education system and when it's a lack of social conformity, essentially, isn't it? You know, like if we're choosing to do education differently because we want a different level of inclusion and accessibility for our kids, like you're coming away from this social construct of education happens in school and it happens in this particular way. And I know for our personal experiences with our kids, there's also been such a prolonged period of healing that's needed to happen. And so the concept of what education looks like during that process of healing is even less. You know, there's terms that people use, like unschooling, for example, this process of undoing those belief systems, those constructs. Absolutely. And I think we're now, we're not with Arthur, because his autistic journey and his trauma around the education system has been so significant. But with our eldest, with Rory, I'm just 18 months in to him being home educated, starting to see these glimmers of engagement and doing things that would previously have been so anxiety inducing and would have sent him into this kind of emotional spiral of dysregulation and anxiety. I've had to spend so much time just bubbling us up as a family unit and bubbling the kids up as a pair, and just shutting out that negativity, shutting out that voice. And their healing, my like mama bear instincts around their healing, have been really empowering for my own journey of stripping away that negativity as well, because I've had to model it. But my God, is it not? Like, it's so hard.
It is. Whilst you know, running a business as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You know, that little thing as well.
You know, I don't do things by half. So yeah. So then, to kind of sum up, that is then empower yourself with self-knowledge. Like, you are the only person that is going to know you, and don't let anybody tell you how to live your life and what you don't have to make sense to any motherfucker out there, right?
Absolutely not. No.
That's like probably one of the most empowering things I could ever advise anyone to do.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yes. So, you know, even if you are faced with that negativity, create safe people, find out how people feel, you know, how they're responding to you. Are they invalidating you? Are they disempowering you? And then, you know, choose not to spend time with those people. You can, because we can try and re-educate people till we're blue in the face, and sometimes it's just going to fall on deaf ears. Unfortunately, it's the way of the world. But what you can do is then find communities, find safe people, and then create spaces where you are supported and you are seen and heard and validated for who you are on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's so strong and it's so powerful. And then that, I think it's like this cyclical process of empowering yourself as well. So the more you do it, the more you're validated that actually that feels better, that feels safer, and the more you can just kind of show up from an authenticity point of view and actually not worry about it. And what the really interesting thing is, like, people step into our house as well, knowing that as a queer and neurodivergent space, like, you show up as you are, and you are who you are, and that's cool. Like, if you need to doom scroll for 10 minutes after we've had a conversation, that's totally all right. If you need to check out and have a nap, that's totally all right. And we find now that at home that we have so many more people coming through our door at home as well, which I love, because we have got this kind of safe community that we've created for ourselves, and it's reciprocal, you know, which is lush. So nice.
I'm a bit of a lonely part of my journey at the minute. It's not that long since we only started homeschooling in January. So we're doing the whole deschooling thing, like breaking down all of that. And I had to tell my dad to stop calling me, because in 2 weeks, I've never heard him say the word curriculum as much as I have in my whole freaking entire life. So I had to put a boundary and say, look, I understand that you care, but can you please just back off? And stop calling me and asking about my child's education, which you've never really paid much of an interest to before I decided to take her out of the system. So and so for me, it's I'm finding like I'm at a space where it's hard work.
I think that's and there's a real like sense of self-doubt that can happen during that process. And I think as a parent, the only thing that I can say is that the more that I followed my gut and the more that I enforced those boundaries, the more that I was like, oh no, this is right. And I'm not just being pig-headed about it or like pie in the sky about it. Like, I genuinely, like, this is the right thing to do, and I can see that change is happening. And it is validating, like, the longer that you're in it, and it does become, I do think in my experience, it's become less lonely. But I think you have to seek out those safe connections.
Yeah, absolutely that. So there's like some home education groups that I'm going to connect with and everything.
Great.
Like so, you know, and it's not always just from negativity from strangers. It is from the people that are blooming closest to you. I think that's been the hardest part for me, because, you know, I don't really give a shit what someone down the road thinks of me or my life or my decisions, to be honest, or some, you know, keyboard warrior online. But when it's somebody that close to you, I think that's when the difficulty can come in. And when I've sort of questioned, oh gosh, am I doing the right thing? I've felt I'm an awful parent, but I'm not. I know in my gut and in my heart that this is the absolutely right thing to do for my child. And I wish I had that opportunity. I wish my mum would have done that for me when I was little. Because school was horrific.
And I think, you know, working in the SEN space on the other end of the spectrum for the business, outside and away from the inclusion and consultancy stuff for businesses, the work that we do with SEN kids, we have so many children who've got barriers to attendance because of difficulties with inclusion. And these are the stories. This is why, as a business point of view, we're called the SENStory Group, because we hear the same story, the same narrative again and again. And that absolutely exists in the SEN space. But there are, I can tell you from experience in the disability sector and in like working with children and young people with additional needs, there are so many people who are telling the same stories and having the same experiences over and over again. And you can't be dismissing that. You know, we have a very one size fits all education system, and we also have a huge gap between mainstream and specialist education as well, where for so many neurodivergent children and young people, there is nowhere that is fit for purpose within the education system for them to sit, because they don't sit in a group of typical kind of specialist education provision or typical mainstream provision. There's got to be some kind of hybrid way around meeting those needs, and that's okay. That's why we do what we do at SENStory HQ, because if we it's why we exist. We couldn't exist if there weren't more of us out there,
Yeah, exactly that. And that's why what you do in these spaces are so needed. So is it an in-person space, or do you have like an online community that someone listening to this podcast today that is neurodivergent or has a neurodiverse child or a child with disabilities, can they access your space?
Yeah, so we have it's primarily a face-to-face space. We have a lot of families, particularly through the EHCP process, who will travel to us for assessment and support, so that they can then get things put in place more locally for them. So that's one way that happens. But what we're working on at the moment is, I hate to use this term, but it's an online equine curriculum. So actually, we can offer kind of learning that happens from an online perspective for a lot of our kids who've got barriers for access to the community or barriers for access to education as well, and for that to happen in an online space. So we are primarily a face-to-face provision at the moment, but we're working really hard this year to do some more outreach to kind of wider communities, knowing that there's such a need across the country.
There is a huge need for us to, for me, I feel we need to abolish a lot of these systems and go back to tribes and communities. Like, I've sat in spiritual communities since I was a teenager, and that's like where, of the belief it takes a village. Like, where's my fucking village?
Can someone give me a signpost and a map, please?
Where are you? Because I'm out here drowning. And I really want to see. I've started to see that becoming more and more back in, is like more and more of these communities where we are supporting each other. In supporting ourselves, supporting the adults, supporting the children. We're all like sharing responsibilities within communities, and for me, being a single parent as well, like that is just vital for me. Otherwise, where I've got my communities but I facilitate all of those communities, and sometimes it's like, well, actually I need to kind of come out of leading and facilitating and be supported too. So that's where I kind of think that we need all this. We need more community, more togetherness, more open discussions and open arms to say, I'm here. Like, how can I support you? What do you need?
And there's a process of raising up the voice, isn't there, as well, that happens when we bring those communities together. We like strength in numbers as we come together, as we share those experiences and we connect because of shared lived experience as neurodivergent parents to neurodivergent children, or whatever those communities might be. We're able to kind of raise the voice within those marginalized communities and get it out into the world. So it's definitely there's definitely a strength in that.
Thank you, Jo. I've absolutely loved this conversation. And so this is the podcast is that inner voice, right? Because for me, it's like, I just love that name because I have a constant inner voice. Of sometimes 20 people, sometimes one. So what does your inner voice say to you? I always ask all my guests this. Like,
I think for me, there are often many of them, but when I find the quiet, and I think that's a real neurodivergent thing anyway, isn't it? But when I do find the quiet and I do find the calm, I always find myself coming back to my gut instincts, to like that heart space, that kind of gut instinct, that driver. And if I listen into that, that's when I know what feels right, even if it's hard.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Thank you. And I'm going to put the links in the episode notes so you can connect with Jo and SENStory as well. So thank you, Jo, so much for coming on today's podcast, and make sure you catch up with the next episode.
Thank you, Jen.